I'm Brian Tempest. I've worked 30 odd years in the pharma industry. I've worked last 12 years for Ranbaxy in a whole variety of leadership positions, president, managing director, CEO, and I've recently been chief mentor and vice chairman, and I've just retired from Ranbaxy in the last really couple of weeks. Well, the whole world is worried about the cost of health, and whether you're an insurer or whether you're a company or whether you're just a company that's paying for your healthcare benefits of your employees or your retirees, and so everybody wants to try and bring down the cost of health, and that works very much in favour of the generic industry. So the fundamental drivers for the generic industry are very positive in the long term. I think one of the key things in order to be able to compete with competitive pressure is, one, you've got to be very careful about your costs. You've got to make sure that you're manufacturing the product at a very in the most efficient manner, that you're starting from the right raw materials, that you're doing the right processes. This has all got to be within the regulatory approvals and good quality control, but at the same time you've got to make sure you're as efficient as possible in manufacturing. And the other issue that you've got to focus on is making sure that you have a good, strong pipeline, whether you invest in R&D yourself or you license it in. But the secret to the generic business is actually having a strong pipeline, and that's what's important. Well, I think it's just an important part of the overall sort of process of competing. If you are a small company, you license in the product, you make sure you're licensing the right product. And if you're a small company, you're licensing in molecules. You need to make sure that you're licensing in the right molecules that add to your portfolio. But its product flow is what drives the industry forward. And many companies have a huge amount of products coming into their pipeline, and you just take that product and you can take it around the world in terms of your relationships and your distributors or your subsidiaries or whichever way you're placed around the world. Well, the importance of India is that there's a huge strength in chemistry, and that is the basis for anybody who's in the science-based industry. And there is, I think, 117,000 MScs of chemistry a year coming out of India, and I know there's only about 3,000 coming out of the UK. So it's the strength of chemistry that works in India's favour, together with a focus on education and, of course, low costs and the number of FDA-approved manufacturing plants. It really means that India is centre stage on the generic pharma space, and also it's very important to the discovery sectors as well. And so that's what is leading lots of people to either use India for their markets of the developed world, or else for Indian companies to expand out of India. Well, I think the challenges in the short term is the appreciation of the rupee. If the rupee appreciates very strongly, that will, I think, dent some of the economic growth. At the moment, it's at 39 to the dollar, but it could become 35, and some people even think it could be below 30. If that happens, that will impact the competitive strength. And on the longer, and then so the midterm issues, I think, are everybody assumes that the infrastructure issues are going to get sorted out in the next 4 or 5 years. But if they don't, then that could strangle the economic growth as well. Well, I mean, if you can take products to the American market and you get FDA approval for them, and you can get 1 in 4 ANDAs approved from India, then that is a stamp of approval. There are more FDA approved plants in India than there is in any other market of the world other than America. And in fact, probably the market that's even more difficult to penetrate after America is Japan. And there are now a number of Indian companies that are manufacturing products in India and selling them on the Japanese market. Well, from a consumer point of view, India is a great story at the moment. I mean, and from a consumer point of view, when a consumer hears about India, all he hears about is economic growth and expansion and the fact that most people are wanting to come to India to set up shop there. With an economic growth across all sectors of at 9% GDP growth, then there is a lot of interest in using India. I mean, the high profile story of the car industry at the moment is out there to be seen, where whilst there are lots of big cars around, everybody's interested in the small cars coming out of India and China. My personal view is I think it's unlikely for the big pharma companies to move into the generic space. There are a couple of exceptions. One is Novartis and one is Sanofi Aventis at the moment do have generic sectors, but the rest have either divested them or moved out of them or sold them in the last 5 or 10 years. In fact, some companies have moved in and moved out twice in the last 20 years. So it is a different business. It's got different dynamics. It leads to conflicts when one gets in front of regulators and legislators in terms of how you view intellectual property. So I don't see the big pharma companies getting into the generic sector. They may review it again if Novartis makes a huge success of Sandoz, but in general terms I think the trend is likely to be one of keeping space between the two sorts of industries. And in fact, the Indian companies that are building discovery businesses, they will probably separate those from their generic businesses. So again, they give space between the two. The recent Supreme Court decision on Keflex, which relates to a patent discovery of a accelerator in a car, in a lorry, actually has redefined the definition of obviousness, and it's that particular redefinition which is going to lead to a review of which discovery patents will be sound in the light of a court case, again, where a judge will make a decision as to whether there is this patent is secure or not, or whether it can be challenged and whether there are some holes in that patent. And therefore I think that the KSR Teleflex statement of obviousness, the full impact of it is yet to be seen, but certainly a lot of patent attorneys think it's going to have a major impact in the next few years. Well, I think the message I was trying to give is that both India and China are on the rise, and that if you as a small, medium-sized company haven't taken into account how you can use Asia, not necessarily enter the Asian domestic markets, but how you can use Asia, then you're likely to lose out from a competitive point of view, because many of your competitors are actually going to these markets and forming alliances and are taking products from those markets, or else setting up businesses in those markets to generate product flow from India and China. Well, I think so far, this Congress has been a very active one with lots of questions, and I think that the meetings are about people talking to each other and challenging their points of view, so that people can come away with a changed view on certain things. And I think so far during this meeting we've had a good start.